Throughout both currently released Colourgrave games, there's this constant theme of light versus shadow. In Prodigal, you fight against the lifeless knight Var, whose brother is worshipped as god of the sun in his homeland of Esterosa. On the other hand is Veritas, the god of shadow and Var's master, who you are using along your way to defeat Var. And of course there are two gods of light currently in Lyrian, one in hiding, recovering her strength, the other an intruder from another world, slowly taking over. These things give us more interesting angles to look at this idea of light versus shadow. Our protagonist is using the powers of shadow to fight against an evil force, and there's an invasive light that even the gods fear. The inherent morality in these two opposing aspects is clearly not so cut and dry in this story. So now, let's move on to Ledamra. The story we see play out in this world also has a lot of light and shadow stuff, the most obvious one probably being the Dawn, which I've talked about before. But again, it seems like it's not quite as simple as light equals good. In fact, the Dawn organisation, or cult, or whatever they are portrayed as the bad guys here. It's very similar to Prodigal in the way light is seen as dangerous and shadow seen as protective. In fact, in Prodigal, Lyrian's real god of light, Enether, says as much, that they were hiding their world behind a veil of shadow. Was that Veritas' job? Was his downfall in the War of Glass what paved the way for Rayam? Topic for another time. For now, let's go back to Ledamra and look at the other way we see light used in the story. Souls. If you don't know, in Ledamra, when a person dies, they do not leave a corpse behind. Instead, their body turns into a little ball of light, as described by Falcon, and as seen by us when we collect them for Riley. Although they look a little more flame-like when we see them, this can be put down to style choice and also to make them stand out more for the player. So why does this matter? Well, apart from the fact that all the souls are gathered in a single place called the grave for unknown reasons, and what's that about? These lights seem to hold some kind of power, or maybe they are some kind of power, and they aren't just inanimate blank slates either, they're still people. Bonnie communicates with them, they're what inhabit the skeletons she creates, or maybe she doesn't create them, maybe that's just how the souls manifest when used by the Scythe. But either way, these aren't real skeletons, remember, dead bodies aren't a thing here. Plus, look at those proportions, could you imagine what these things would look like with all their flesh intact, not to mention the giant ones? Bonnie calls these souls her crew, and it seems like, at least from her perspective, she rescued them from an eternity of boredom trapped in this dust-covered scythe at the grave. And, well, they all seem to do what she tells them, so maybe it's true? Or maybe they have to obey the commands of whoever wields the scythe. Personally, I lean more towards the idea that she did it as much for them as she did for herself. She mentions being able to hear the voices from inside the weapon, as can Genevieve. How can you stand carrying that thing? What? That scythe is incredibly loud. Are you deaf? Oh yeah, the crew gets pretty rowdy. Sorry about that. Surprised you can hear them. Please, get it away from me. Being Hearthen, they can hear the emotions of other people, and, well, as I said, the souls are still people, but where am I going with this? Well, there is one other person who comments on the souls in Hollow Whimsy. The scythe is named Hollow Whimsy, by the way, which is a sick name, but anyway, that person is Armadelle. But she talks about it in quite a different way than Bonnie or Genevieve do. And that scythe, you carry so many burdens. Can you bear so much light? This is the part that got me thinking. I mean, of course we already know that souls are made of light, that's not exactly a revelation at this point, but it was the specific phrasing referring to the souls as a single collective light rather than individuals. Something about it just clicked in my head, and I was reminded of the other place where light was talked about in such a way. In the distant reaches of the primordial sky, a masked dragon appeared, shielding a sea of light in her wings. She gathered the light into a tight embrace and formed Ledamra, the world upon which we walk. Okay, so, the first part, shielding a sea of light in her wings, that could be interpreted as her finding a distant star and hiding its light from the rest of the universe with her wings, similar to how Lyrian was said to be shrouded or veiled to hide from external threats such as Rayam. However, then the next line about gathering the light in a tight embrace to form Ledamra leads me to think that, no, Ledamra is quite literally made of some kind of light. Now, light in this case, and actually in all other cases we cover in this video, might be synonymous with a certain kind of magic. At the very least, it's not literally just light in the way that we know it in the real world. There's some additional factor to this particular light. But what I find interesting about this opening couple of lines is that it doesn't specify that Armadelle, the masked dragon is Armadelle by the way, I'm sure that much was obvious by now, but just in case, you know, it doesn't specify that Armadelle made this sea of light. If anything, it seems to imply that she simply found it. Or maybe we should be focusing on the gathering part of the creation. Maybe the Sea of Light was what she had gathered in order to create Ledamra, like maybe this light is some kind of cosmic background radiation magic that permeates the entire universe, and she scraped a bunch of it together like soap bubbles off the surface of water. Whatever the source, the end result doesn't share the same ambiguity. Ledamra is made of this light, and that's not where this ends. After creating the scales, interestingly not from light but from her own body, her actual scales, although possibly using the same light as a kind of ingredient, for lack of a better term. It's not made clear. She is the god of life after all, she probably doesn't need the light to give life to her scales. In fact, it's possible that being the god of life is what made it possible for her to create a planet from the light in the first place. Anyway, after creating the scales, she then went sleepy time, and the scales, using the last of their mother's light, created their own children, imparting in them a piece of themselves. This imparting a piece of themselves is presumably where the gifts of the scales come from, but notice that the children of the scales were made using the last of their mother's light. The same light that she used to create Ledamra itself? Well, no. Come on, haven't you been paying attention? Where is this information coming from? The game's intro, the intro that exists in a pop-up book in Lorebright's library. Even if the source was a trustworthy one, it's a creation myth. Obviously it'd be a hindrance to productivity if we doubted literally everything the game ever tells us, but this in particular is made to be dubious if you just look into it a little bit. Well then, why did you even bring it up in the first place? Okay, fine, I admit that I'm cherry picking here, but I just don't think the planet itself was literally made of this light. I simply believe the myth is meant to imply that the gathered light was used to imbue life into an already existing planet. Again, Armadale is the god of life. So where does that leave us? Light is souls? Yeah, pretty much. Honestly, there aren't exactly a lot of dots to connect here, except for maybe these two. If the people of this world were made using this light, and those same people are reduced to light again when they die, which we call a soul, does it not then make sense to assume that the light was already souls before they were moulded into the children of the scales? I mean, again, Armadale is the god of life, who's to say that she can't just take a bunch of souls and move them somewhere else? But of course that then begs the question, where did the souls originally come from? The idea that they manifested in space doesn't quite hold up as well when we consider the light to have been souls from the start. It's too bad we don't know of some catastrophic event that would have resulted in thousands of deaths occurring sometime in Armadale's past. My dear friend, your talents never fail to impress. What an unsettling piece of history you have there. I hear its owner wore a blue cloak and slaughtered enemies in droves. Surely they'd have quite the tale or two to tell. At this point, I feel it would be redundant to question how Crocodile knows about Armadale's past, partly because I think it's more questionable how the mask that he's talking about came into his possession in the first place, but also because every time we start looking into the lore of the Colorverse, this fucker is somehow already involved. Looking back, it's honestly baffling that he didn't worm his way into the Rayham video too. But anyway, back to the point. Yes, it's clear that the War of Glass would have been a time that Armadale would have liberated many a soul from their corporeal forms. I posit that Armadale took a bunch of souls that she'd harvested in Lyrian and gave them new forms in Ledamra. Maybe that's part of why people don't leave bodies behind when they die, and why souls are kept at the grave. I do have a couple of theories pertaining to the grave, but that's probably best explored in its own video. For now, I'm more curious about the implications of Armadale's transportation of all these souls, if I'm correct about it, that is. So, first of all, souls are a thing in Lyrian. That's interesting. I mean, I guess it was already obvious because of Torrent, but he's a special case. He was cursed to be reborn eternally by Nixian, so the soul of his that we see in Prodigal could have also been unique for all that we knew. But now, well, I don't know, does this imply that there's an afterlife in Lyrian? Like, does it work on Dragon Ball rules where each planet has its own afterlife? Or is there another place in the universe, or maybe even another plane of reality altogether, that all souls go to? Apart from those on Ledamra, which it actually is kinda similar to Torrent now that I think about it, huh? Bit weird that Armadale is able to hold souls in a world the same way Nixian did. That is definitely a topic for another time though. As for what else all this could possibly mean, I don't know, like, what do you want me to say? Armadale's a colossal fuck-up of literal cosmic proportions? Yeah, I think that was made pretty obvious over the course of this video. Honestly, I feel kinda sorry for her. It almost seems like Ledamra was her attempt at redeeming herself in some way, and it has not gone super well. But you know what they say, third time's the charm. Maybe she can go start a new world and try again.
Scales, light, and the best intentions. These were the ingredients chosen to create the perfect little gods, until Armadale accidentally added an extra ingredient to the concoction. Incompetence!
Or maybe it's best that she doesn't. Anyway, thank you so much for indulging my ramblings as always. Don't forget to poke your head in the Colourgrave Discord server, although I'm fairly certain most of you are coming from there. But hey, you know, one day when Colourgrave makes it big and there's a demand for lore analysis on everything they make, I'll be there, waiting to funnel more people into the deeper fandom, and tricking them into hitting the dog's ball to the left in Prodigal. That's truly the best part.
Oh, no! 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 No!